Everybody, I really appreciate you being here. I'm Rick Callendar. I'm the president of the California Hawaii NAACP, and it's, my sheer honor and pleasure to be able to kick off the Legacy Awards for 2023. This is our 11th Legacy Awards. The NAACP has always utilized our Legacy Awards to honor those who've really made a significant difference on the civil rights movement. And I'll talk a little bit about it tonight when I'm talking to the crowd. But what we wanted to do is be able to offer the opportunity for the press to be able to be with folks that often we have never seen a lot of these gentlemen together and being able to talk about the story. So it's not just the Tommy Smith and John Carlos story or the Olympic effort that came out of San Jose State, but it's everybody together. We're going to have a video today which really pulls it together. This was a movement in and of itself. And so I think it's critical for everybody to understand how this really was the start of the movement. So what I'm going to do is first I'll see if folks have anything that they'd like to say for the press. And then we'll just open the questions that you have for the media. I think I'm going to look to Ian Nod. How long are we going for?
Till 5:30.
Till 5:30. So everyone
About 30 minutes.
So maybe we start from, unfortunately, Tommy Smith wasn't able to join us today, but he sent one of his good friends and a branch president, nonetheless, as well as someone that sits on the executive committee with me. So maybe we'll start with you, Darrell Goode. So if you have anything to say, we'll just move our way down the line, and then we'll open the questions that the press may have.
I'm Darrell Goode, branch president of Sacramento, Kenneth. I'm not going to take a lot of time with these esteemed representatives from the athletic world and social justice, but it's my pleasure to be asked by Dolores and Dr. Thomas Smith to accept the award on his behalf, and understanding we worked together for quite a while. The challenges that these men have endured, and they did an excellent job, and they should appreciate it, what job they did, and they don't keep creating that, the roles that they were speaking to those who came behind us. So that was my pleasure to be here with these gentlemen.
My name is John Carlos. I'm honored to be here, first of all. Most of all, because we're here in the honor of legacy. It's a great honor and a privilege to be a part of such a great legacy. And to have level leaders, two individuals that meant so much through this legacy, to still be here in the last 30 days, we lost quite a bit of individuals that was involved in this whole scenario. So once again, it's an honor to be here with them to share this opportunity to share to society. Thank you.
I'm Ken Noel, co-founder of the Olympic Project for Human Rights. And this is my first press conference. I've been at a number of them with these guys, but I've never participated in one myself over a 56-year period since we did the created the organization at San Jose State. So it's a great honor for me to be here. And appreciate you guys doing what you're doing.
My name is Harry Edwards, co-founder of the Olympic Project for Human Rights. Sociology of sport. I've been in this struggle for most of my adult life. I'm not a big advocate of the great leader perspective or theory, even when it comes down to that man sitting 10 foot high on a horse atop an 8-foot pedestal in a town square. The reality is that there are a whole bunch of people, hundreds, sometimes thousands, who carried the burden of whatever the challenge was, and without them, he wouldn't be leading anything. He'd just be out for a ride. So at the end of the day, it's people that make movements, and we've been fortunate in sport to have generation after generation going back 157 years of activist athletes, activist sportsmen like Ken Noel and Tommy Smith and John Carlos and Bill Russell and Jim Brown, Arthur Ashe, most certainly Wilma Rudolph and Rose Robinson, a bunch of people some of you have never even heard of, but who carried that struggle down through the generations. And so me sitting here today, any honor that might be accorded me is because I had the privilege of walking in their shadow. And I want to acknowledge that and make sure that the accolades are properly placed and projected. Thank you.
We'll stand open to any questions from any of the press.
Yes, I do have a question for Dr. Carlos.
And where you're from.
Antonio Harvey, California Black Media. I do have a question for Dr. Carlos and Dr. Edwards. Dr. Edwards, you just ran off a slew of icons, who was in the fight for civil rights. But I do want to ask you two this because I do know, you and Tommy Smith were there. Peter Norman, okay, I want to bring him up. I know he wanted to do some things, when you guys were protesting there in Mexico City. Just want to get your thoughts on him. I know he done passed away, but and he's non-black though. Of course, though, people don't know his story unless they see the documentary. But you guys, you know him well. Just want to get your thoughts on Peter Norman and his stand. I think he finished second place between you two. Yes, sir. Starting with you, Dr. Carlos.
Well, Peter Norman, I'll start by saying Peter Norman was a man's man. He was an independent thinker. He had a concern about the people of Australia, the Aboriginals. He had a concern about our plight in America. I like the fact that Peter chose to stand for what was right. It's not about Peter being white, it's about him being right in this instance. He didn't have to do what he did, but he took the initiative to say, hey man, I agree with what you guys are doing and I would like to be a part. And why did that come about? It came about because the atrocities that were taking place in Australia with the Aboriginal people. So mind you now, when he stepped out to support this activity that was taking place, he didn't realize at that particular time that Tommy Smith and John Carlos might have had shelter, leaning on one another, in the sense that America got upset with what we did. They can go beat up on Mr. Smith and I can get a break. They come to beat up on me, Mr. Smith got a break. But in Australia, being that Australia was parallel to South Africa in their attitude towards people of color, they beat on him 365 days a year. He didn't have arrests, but he never got weak. He never denounced us. He never backed away from us. He stood with us to his death. So I'll always have love, admiration, and respect for Peter Norman.
Ken, John, Tommy, myself, we were in the crucible in 1968. Our churches were being bombed. The leaders, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, being shot down in broad open daylight. It was the most turbulent, politically violent 5-year period between my birthday on November 22nd, 1963, and the assassination of John F. Kennedy right through June 6th, 1968, and the assassination of Bobby Kennedy. And in between, the political turmoil was probably the most violent since the 1860s. We were in that mix. Peter Norman was a young man who was on his way to the pedestal, and we had given a bunch of people buttons. John had some buttons, and Paul Hoffman, Harvard University crew team, had buttons, and he accepted one and wore it on the podium. I'm not sure that he was totally aware at the time, since he wasn't in it like we were. They had their problems in Australia, of course. The extent of involvement that simply wearing that button meant, because there were black athletes on the American team who wouldn't wear that button. But he wore it, and but I don't think there's any way he could have realized the extent to which he would come under pressure, not just in his country, but from my biographer, Mr. J. Edgar Hoover, who accumulated copious and voluminous volumes of dispatches, and letters, and speeches, and classroom lectures, and so forth. I'm not sure that Peter was aware of all of that, but still, he stepped up, and he became part of that, and for as long as there are Olympic Games, he will be in that picture, part of that struggle, and I hope that he will be remembered for having stepped up and done so. And while some say, you know, and I think that that's a valid perspective in a lot of ways, that he's white, but that didn't matter. It did matter. It mattered to us back then. It mattered to a lot of white people in this country, and it most certainly mattered to his white government in Australia, and it mattered. So the fact that he crossed over and said, hey, yeah, we can make a change. We are better than this. I've always had a deep appreciation for that.
Dr.
Well,
Carlos.
let me just say that Peter Norman was an ally, and throughout history, with our struggle, we've always needed allies. And for a long time, in many instances, the allies were white. So that's, you know, as long as they're allies, that's not bad. They're vital to progress and to the kind of activism that we are after.
For
Thank you,
Dr.
Dr.
Carlos and Dr. Edwards, Chris Peterman with the Sacramento Goode. I think from my standpoint, it seems like your message has grown in terms of prominence and become more accepted maybe by the masses, but there are still obvious systemic issues. I'm just curious, in your opinions, what you think the next steps need to be for there to be more progress and to eventually, hopefully, get to the level of what you guys speak.
I'll extend that to Mr. Edwards. He could probably
Well,
articulate that a lot better.
first of all, we have to understand that what happened in 1968 was the continuation of an ongoing struggle that goes back 157 years from current time. And it's not individuals or individual personalities or leaders that generate struggle, it's conditions. And those conditions are so deeply rooted within the context of the American experience continue to prevail today. So generation after generation of activists come to the fore, step up, make a statement, and then subsequently another generation of activists does the same thing. This goes all the way back to 2 years after the Civil War. The reality is that the quest to form that more perfect union is perpetual. Our circumstances as Black people in this country, as people of color in this country, are diverse and dynamic. Our struggle, therefore, is multifaceted, including sports, and perpetual. And the one thing that history teaches us, if nothing else, is that there are no final victories. We thought that the quest to free women from reproductive bondage was won, but here we are today in a life and death, literally a life and death struggle over women's right to medical services that they require. We thought that the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was a final statement, but here we are today fighting voter repression, especially in communities of color. We thought that the quest for relevant, creditable education with Brown versus Board of Education, Topeka, Kansas, with some of the other tremendous verdicts that organizations like the NAACP have won over the years, had put us on a higher standard in terms of education. But in point of fact, here we are today fighting state-run connivances to eliminate history, to ban books, to keep our young people from understanding their history so that they do not really have a grip and a grasp on where they are today and the trajectory of where they might be headed. So the reality is that these movements will continue. They are just as sure to arise as our conditions continue to be dynamic and changing, and there are no final victories. So you ask me, where are we today? We are in the midst of a struggle, and there's a huge one already well this side of the sports political horizon involving women, because while folks look at Title IX, which gave women parity in terms of support for sports, especially in the collegiate ranks, they very, in 1972, they very seldom look at 1973 in Roe v. Wade, which gave the colleges and universities some assurance that if we give this young lady a scholarship in May, she's going to be around to start school in September and to play in the March Madness in March and to run in the NC2A finals in June in terms of track and field. That all now goes away. And so what happened in Roe v. Wade is an existential threat to women's sports in this country, not just at the collegiate level, but at the professional level. If a college won't give a young woman a contract, a scholarship, because she may not be around, then what about the pro team that signs her to a money contract? That too becomes now challenged. So we have to understand also that sports are merely the canary in the mine shaft. It is on stage, it is high profile, it is visible. Nobody can deny when they're not there. Nobody can deny when you go to states where they've instituted these draconian anti-Roe v. Wade measures, that women are not going to those colleges and universities to play sports. I'm getting calls and emails all the time. Dr. Edwards, I want my daughter to go to a free state. And what they mean by free state is a state where if she needs medical services, she can get them. And so they don't want their daughters to go to states where they could be charged with murder. They don't want their sons to go to states where they could be charged with accessory to murder in case they drive their girlfriend or some friend to a doctor in another state. So all of that's on the table. So you ask me, where is the struggle and when are we going to reach that point where it's done? We are in pursuit of that more perfect union, not that perfect union. There are no final victories.
What's also important is our youth knowing and understanding our history, the history of social activism, and participating themselves in creating more history. As sport becomes more and more important in our society over the years, with more and more money and resources being put into it, our youth are capitalizing on that, and as they grow, they need to participate just as we did.
You guys can pretty much pay.
Excuse me, let's get.
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Corbin McCarthy, precinct reporter. So, I mean, it's obvious we've seen black individuals dominate professional sports time and time again on the court, on the field. But when it comes to front office positions, coaching positions, ownership, there's little to no representation. So this is for all of you guys. In your opinion, what needs to change to increase those numbers?
Well,
Hard question.
First of all, let's be, we can be honest when we can't be right. Nothing changes in America relative to this critically central realm of human interrelationships and discourse that we call race relations, without there being some transactional development. We remember a time when there were no black quarterbacks, because they said black quarterbacks didn't make sense because they couldn't think, they were just instinctual. Now, you look at the pro ranks, you look at Lamar Jackson, you look at all these black quarterbacks, you look at somebody like Pat Mahomes. I mean, this boy is throwing balls around corners. And you look at this emergence of the black quarterbacks. People say, well, pro football has changed. They've grown up. They've matured. That's nonsense. What gave us the black quarterback at the professional level and the collegiate level was the activities of people like Sid Gilman and Eric Coryell and Bill Walsh, who changed football from a run first to a pass first game. Pass was used to set up the run, not vice versa, as had historically been the case under the Vince Lombardis and the George Hallases and so forth. And so now all of a sudden the key player on the team is the quarterback. He can kill you with one throw. All of a sudden the game is over. And so what happened on the defensive side of the ball was that they developed an antidote to that and literally began to keep statistics on sacks. And when they hit the quarterback, they didn't just sack him. A lot of times they put him out for a game. They put him out for half a season. They put him out for a whole year. They ended his career. And so it became necessary at that point to have a quarterback who doesn't just have pocket mobility. He had to have escapability. And that meant that athletic talent, those athletic, quote, instincts that were so negative before, now became an asset. What I'm saying is that what gave us the black quarterback wasn't a change in racial attitude or disposition. What gave us the black quarterback was Charles Haley and Lawrence Taylor and Reggie White and those sack artists, just as surely as the lion gave the antelope his speed. And so what we're looking at now is a situation where we have black quarterbacks all over the place, and look at the quarterbacks who were drafted over the last 3 drafts. So in the first round. So what I'm saying is that we have to look for the transactional relationship in terms of the front office. We have not figured out a way to generate a transactional condition where it becomes imperative that you have black presidents, GMs, and so forth, vice presidents in the front offices of NFL teams. Basketball has made a little bit more progress in that regard because the league is 78% black. So that's a transactional thing. At some point, somebody's got to be able to go down to the locker room and talk to them brothers. And so they have to have people in positions of leadership to do that. Now, where I think it really shows up is in ownership, because not a lot of black people have $3 or $4 billion that they can sit on top of the TV set and watch 4 or 5 times a week. That's where the real change transactionally has to come about, because the ownership in professional sports is a fraternity, and they are a tight-knit fraternity. So you have to look for the transactional nexus if you're going to understand some of these changes and dispositions that we see throughout the hierarchy of sports in this country, collegiate and professional.
And those guys need to understand the history and the conditions of the society, as well as the brother here understands it. That's key.
Jordan Latimer with Sacramento Observer. This is, you hit it on it kind of head, Dr. Noel, about understanding our history as young folks and navigating this current time. What would you guys as a whole panel say about assessing the present time? And again, I kind of have Dr. Edwards kind of alluded to about the complexity of the current time, all the money that's being pumped into everything now. What kind of advice would you give to young folks in today's era as we take on this next phase of the fight and this next phase of going against and figuring out the next phase of civil rights and everything of that nature?
Were you talking to me?
Yeah, the whole panel, but
my hearing is not good, so I didn't catch much of that, you know.
I can repeat.
Well, let me try to answer some of it. Here's every era is different. That's why Bill Russell and Elgin Baylor were not Chuck Cooper and Earl Lloyd. Muhammad Ali was not Joe Louis. You look at this and you see that every era is different. The thing that is critical across all eras, irrespective of the seeming complexity of the situation, because when it's new, all the situations appear complex. It's like Nelson Mandela said, the impossible is impossible until somebody does it. All situations are complex until somebody says, hey, we're better than this, we can change this. And so what I would, the critical thing is that we continue to inspire our young people to dream, to hold to their dreams, but also to get them to understand that they have to learn to dream with their eyes open, because that is how they deal with the realities that they're confronted with. Look, let's be real. You're not going to find athletes saving us or saving this idea of democracy. You're not going to find a high-profile athlete, because that's not the business that they're in. But by way of their sacrifices, by way of what Carlos and Smith did, by way of what we tried to organize to get done and put before the world, what this indicates is a fundamental, deeply rooted belief that we're worth saving. And with that, you can inspire each generation to continue to dream. We're talking about 1968 and Carlos and Smith and the Olympic Project Human Rights now, 55 years later, because subsequent generations have continued to dream. LeBron James and Chris Paul and Carmelo Anthony and Dwayne Wade went on a TV, ESPN's ESPY show. They went to him and said, hey, we got something to say. Now, if we had done that back in 1968, they'd have run us out of town. They laughed us out of the building. But when they went, because the movement had progressed to that point, ESPN said how much time you need and when you want to do it. They said, we want to do it in the middle of ESPYs, you got it. And they stood up and said, we have got to do more than Twitter and tweet and Instagram and so forth. We've got to do something. And so Orlando came about and they did something. They stopped the playoffs and they began to mobilize around the vote. And lo and behold, among other things, thanks to the WNBA, we end up with two blue senators from the red state of Georgia. Something that people would never have thought of unless a day after Reconstruction. And so the importance of what these athletes do is not that they're going to save us, but through their actions and their proclamations and their sacrifices and standing up the way Carlos and Smith did, and all of these other athletes, Jim Brown and Bill Russell and Arthur Ashe and Wilma Rudolph and Rose Robinson, somebody who most people have never even heard of. What they show is that we're worth saving. And that is what inspires each successive generation.
And I want to add on to that. I think for the youth, we are still in the middle of the civil rights movement. People think that it is over. This was the middle of the civil rights movement. We haven't left it. What we need the youth to do is continue to find organizations where they can get trained and understand how to be part of the fight. That's what I grew up in, and that's what I hopefully am inspiring to do, is continue to pull the youth behind you. So the fight is still here. They need to engage. You don't need to just be an athlete, but you have to be involved. We have time for about one more question.
We haven't had a question from a lady yet. Where is they?
I don't think we have any room for it.
Okay.
We're going to take one. I know you've been waiting. Just quickly, go ahead.
Real quick, Colin, you mentioned the fist. Colin Kaepernick took a knee. Just want to get your thoughts on his action.
Colin was one of our guys at the San Francisco 49ers. I've been with the 49ers now for 40 years, counseling athletes and talking to them and one thing or another. And Colin was one of our athletes at the San Francisco 49ers, voracious reader, one of the brightest athletes I've ever encountered. Very much concerned about human relations in American society. He took a knee, and after the game where he took a knee, I went into the locker room. I said, Colin, give me your shoes, give me your jersey. Give me your gloves, autograph them all, because I'm gonna send them back to the National Museum on African American History and Culture. He said, why are you doing, what's that about? I said, because that's where they belong. They need to be right there between Smith and Carlos and Muhammad Ali. And the rest of that is history. But what he was saying was, he was in a definitional struggle in the fourth wave of athlete activism, where he was fighting for a definition of 147 black men, women, and children shot by police every year, largely unarmed, since 1968. That this was not justifiable homicide. This was murder under cover of the badge. And he felt strongly enough about it to put his career and, in point of fact, his life on the line when you look at the number of death threats and other things that happened to him. He put it all on the line in order to make that statement that we are better than this. We've got to be. So when he when he did that, I made sure that Lonnie Bunch back at the museum, at the Smithsonian, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, got his jersey, got his shoes, got his gloves, and put them in a kiosk for him back there, because that's where he belonged, right there next to Carlos Smith and Muhammad Ali and the rest of them. So he made a phenomenal statement. It started a movement, not just in this country, it swept the world. There were people in Pakistan taking a knee. Before it was over with, I got a picture of the United States Congress taking a knee. So again, these athletes are critically important in terms of the message that they send. I may not be able to save you. Colin couldn't stop a single person from being shot. In point of fact, his taking a knee was in 2016. George Floyd got shot in 2020. Breonna Taylor got shot in 2020. He couldn't stop that. But what he could do was to stand up and say, we are better than this, and we've got to do better, which is what he did. That was important.
One way out, I just want to say is, as for young individuals, what we're trying to expel to them is that we have to kill the fear factor. We can get the knowledge as young individual athletes, but do you have the courage within to step up and say, I'm sure about where I am, I'm sure about my history, and I'm definitely sure the change has to come. And it's gonna come through you turning up the volume from time to time.
Last question, SACP. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Just one quick thing, and I think, I like what Dr. Edwards said about they represent the people, the experiences of the people, and that Tommy Smith always reminded me that he's years older than I, but we all came from a similar community, which we came from a community where we had a value construct that valued us, and so that gave us the power to stand up. You know, my personal heroes are people I never knew. When I was young, watching fire hoses, dogs on men, women, children, they had the courage to stand there. So I think when he talks about transitional, you know, if you look at the athletes, you can also apply that to any industry, education. You know, they'll put us in an issue where you might be the head of the organization, but they make sure there's no structure of people like us that look like us in between to help keep us in the loop so they can take out any time. So some of the things that is on the onset of what looks, if you look at it and distill it, you know, it is the same issues that we as human beings, men and women, experience. But there is a sense of validation that, you know, we respect them and their stories are like ours. That should give you the strength to keep moving forward.
I'm gonna apologize to the V. Unfortunately, we gotta cut it. We got folks waiting outside the reception. I'm gonna ask for the participants, we can all stand and just get a quick picture.
Hey, man.
This is 80 years, man.
Oh, man.
Yeah, this 80 years is a trip.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Just squeeze in. Yeah, but probably want to do a little bit of.
No, they want me to move to
And then we got you walking out.
people are waiting for them to them or whatever.
Yeah, man, come out.
Thank you. So first focus with these two photographers.
Well,
First, Melissa first, I'm sorry.
ladies first.
Yeah, can you turn it this way?
Sir, in the middle here. You might sit up and turn your body in this direction. A little bit more, a little bit more.
You just get in.
A little bit more.
There we go.
Keep going,
Thank you.
perfect. Okay.
Melissa first. Sorry. Okay, and now, you okay? Yep. Okay.
Good.
Now here.
Get him over here, please.